Imagine it's 1964. You're 22 years old. You just told the entire world you're going to be the greatest of all time. Nobody believes you. The reporters are laughing. The bookmakers have you as a 7-1 underdog. And in less than an hour, you're going to step into a ring with a man who has knocked out almost everyone he's ever faced. His name is Sonny Liston. He hits like a truck. He's beaten grown men unconscious in the first round. And you're just a loud kid from Louisville who talks too much. But here's what nobody understood back then. The talking wasn't arrogance. It was a weapon. Muhammad Ali didn't just train his body, he trained his mind to believe something before it was true. And then he made it true. This is the story of how a 12-year-old boy who had his bicycle stolen became the most dominant mind boxing has ever seen. Not the strongest fighter, not the biggest, the most dominant mind. It started with a red Schwinn bicycle. Cassius Clay, that was his name back then, was furious it had been stolen. He told a police officer he wanted to beat up whoever took it. The officer, who also happened to be a boxing coach, told him he'd better learn how to fight first. That officer's name was Joe Martin, and that one sentence changed the direction of an entire life. For the next 6 years, a skinny kid from Louisville, Kentucky, showed up to that gym almost every single day. Not because someone forced him, because somewhere in his head, he had already decided who he was going to become, long before anyone else believed it. At 18 years old, he won Olympic gold in Rome. He came home a national hero, paraded through the streets of his own city, and within days, he was refused service at a whites-only restaurant in the same country he had just represented on the world's biggest stage. Some say he threw that gold medal into the Ohio River, refusing to let a country wear his achievement while it refused to see him as equal. This is the part people forget about Muhammad Ali. Before he was a legend, he was a young man forced to decide, in public, under enormous pressure, exactly what kind of man he was going to be. Soon after, he made another decision that shocked the country. He converted to Islam and changed his name from Cassius Clay to Muhammad Ali. He grew close to Malcolm X, a man who taught him that dignity wasn't something you asked for. It was something you claimed. Sports writers refused to use his new name for years. He corrected every single one of them on camera, without exception, not because it was a small detail. Because letting people define you, even in something as simple as a name, was the first step toward letting them define everything else. And that's exactly the mindset he carried into the ring against Sonny Liston. Everyone told him he was going to get hurt. He told everyone he was going to float like a butterfly and sting like a bee. Round 6. Liston doesn't answer the bell. Ali is the new heavyweight champion of the world, and the most disbelieved champion in boxing history had just become impossible to ignore. But this isn't a story about a boxing match. This is a story about what happened 3 years later, when Muhammad Ali lost everything, on purpose, because of what he believed in. In 1967, at the absolute peak of his career, undefeated champion of the world, Ali was drafted into the United States Army to fight in Vietnam. He refused. Publicly. On camera, in front of reporters who were already looking for a reason to destroy him, he said his conscience wouldn't let him fight in a war he didn't believe in, against people who had never done anything to him. He knew exactly what that decision would cost him, and it cost him everything. He was stripped of his heavyweight title immediately, without a single fight to defend it. His boxing license was suspended in every state in the country, all at once. He was convicted of draft evasion and sentenced to 5 years in prison, only avoiding it through years of appeals. He wasn't fighting because he was scared. He was refusing to fight people who had never called him an enemy, while the people who did call him an enemy sat comfortably at home. For 3.5 years, the prime years of any athlete's career, the years you never, ever get back, Muhammad Ali did not step into a professional ring. 3.5 years of court dates, of being called a coward, a traitor, a disgrace, by commentators who never once had to make the choice he made. 3.5 years with no income, no title, and no guarantee any of it would ever come back. This is the part of the mindset that most people skip when they tell this story. It's easy to be confident when you're winning. It's easy to talk big when the crowd is already cheering for you. The real test of a mindset isn't how loud you talk when things are going well. It's what you still believe about yourself when everything has been taken away and there's no proof left that you were ever right. Ali kept training anyway, alone mostly, in gyms with no cameras and no crowd. No title to defend, no fight scheduled, no guarantee of a comeback. Just the belief that eventually the world would let him back in, and when it did, he would still be the best there ever was. In 1971, the Supreme Court finally overturned his conviction, unanimously. He was allowed to fight again. But by then, he was 3 years older, and boxing doesn't wait for anyone. A new heavyweight champion had risen in his absence, Joe Frazier, a relentless, brutal fighter who had never lost a professional bout. Their first meeting in 1971 was called the Fight of the Century, and for good reason. 2 undefeated fighters, each claiming to be the true champion. Ali lost that fight on points, the first defeat of his professional career. He was knocked down in the final round in front of the entire world. For a man whose entire identity had been built on being the greatest, that loss could have ended everything. Instead, he studied it. He didn't run from the tape of his own defeat. He watched it over and over, looking for exactly what had gone wrong, and rebuilt himself around the answer. Which brings us to Zaire, 1974. The Rumble in the Jungle. Ali, 32 years old, considered washed up by nearly every expert in the sport, fighting George Foreman, a monster of a heavyweight who had physically dismantled the very man who had just beaten Ali. Every analyst picked Foreman to win, and not by a little. Some feared Ali could be seriously hurt, even killed in that ring. He was the oldest, slowest version of himself he had ever been, walking into a fight against the scariest puncher of his generation. So Ali did something nobody expected, something no trainer would have approved. He leaned back against the ropes and let Foreman hit him, over and over, round after round. From the outside it looked like surrender, like a man too tired and too old to fight back. It was actually the most calculated mind game the sport had ever witnessed. He let Foreman punch himself into exhaustion, absorbing blow after blow to the arms and body while barely moving his feet. Between punches, he was talking directly into Foreman's ear, asking him if that was really all he had. He was breaking a man's mind in real time, while his own body absorbed the cost of it. By round 8, Foreman could barely lift his arms. Exhausted, his guard finally dropped for a fraction of a second. Ali exploded with a combination, and George Foreman went down. The man everyone had already written off reclaimed the heavyweight title of the world at an age when most fighters have already been forced into retirement. That fight was never won in the ring in Zaire. It was won 3 years earlier in courtrooms and in empty gyms with no audience, when Ali decided exactly who he was before anyone else ever had the chance to decide it for him. But the story doesn't end there, because greatness has a price, and Ali kept paying it. In 1975, he faced Joe Frazier one final time, in the Philippines, in a fight now remembered as the Thrilla in Manila. Both men were older, both had something to prove, and both fought like it was the last thing either of them would ever do. Ali later said it felt like the closest thing to death he'd ever experienced. He won, but it cost him something that never fully came back. Years of taking punishment in the ring, fight after fight, eventually caught up with him. In 1984, at just 42 years old, Muhammad Ali was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. The man who had talked faster and louder than anyone in the history of sports slowly lost the ability to speak clearly at all. The man whose greatest weapon had been his own voice spent the last decades of his life mostly in silence, and yet he never disappeared. In 1996, hands visibly shaking, barely able to hold his arms steady, he lit the Olympic flame in front of a worldwide audience of billions. He didn't need to say a single word for that moment to hit harder than almost anything he'd ever said in his prime. He was still there, still standing, still refusing to be erased. He spent his later years traveling the world, meeting world leaders, feeding refugees, visiting children in hospitals, using whatever strength Parkinson's had left him to keep showing up for other people. When he passed away in 2016, tens of thousands of people lined the streets of Louisville for his funeral procession, the same city that had once refused to serve him a meal. That's the part of Muhammad Ali's mindset that outlasts every single fight he ever won or lost. He never waited for the world to agree with him first. He said out loud who he was going to be before he had any proof, and then he spent his entire life closing the distance between the man he claimed to be and the man he actually became. He said he was the greatest before he had a single reason for anyone to believe it. Not because it was already true, because saying it and meaning it was the only way it was ever going to become true. Ali never had the luxury of easy confidence. Every version of belief he ever carried, he built by hand, through a stolen bicycle, a discarded medal, a name he had to fight to keep, 3 lost years in the prime of his life, and one impossible night in Zaire when everyone counted him out. The mindset was never about talking the loudest. It was about being willing to lose everything for what you said you believed in, and finding a way to build yourself back up anyway, again and again, for as long as it took.